Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today we are going to share werewolf encounter horror stories. First story. I kidnapped a werewolf. It's simple. You get a phone call, the person on the other end of the line tells you what to do. You do it, no questions asked, and you're rewarded. With what? Money, women, gold, whatever it is you want so long as you do what you're told and when to do it. It's not rocket science. It's nothing the normal person couldn't do. Depending on the task you choose, your reward is even more intense than the last. What could be more wonderful? What's the catch, you ask? Some of the things you're asked to do isn't exactly legal. It was a normal day in my life the day I found this magical hotbed of wealth, sex, and drugs. Like every other day, I settled myself into work, cooking for a bitch of a boss that didn't seem to give two licks for anyone but himself as he stalked about the kitchen as if he was a shark hunting for prey. His ragged breathing hot on my neck as my knife diced cleanly through a tomato, the rush of excitement I felt as the soft flesh peeled away to show the red, juicy insides, kept the annoyance if the boss off my mind as his eyes popped out of his head. Slice up and down? He snapped at me as if I wasn't doing that anyways. I swallowed the sarcasm that burned into my throat, giving a curt nod to the angry giant who turned on his heels before bounding away in an almost ape-like fashion. I returned to my chopping as I prepped food for the dinner rush that was promised to fall upon the five-star restaurant I currently worked in. Heat sweltering in the depths of my outfit as I moved skillfully through the kitchen to grab more of the supplies I needed. Excitement dancing through my bloodstream as I spotted the meat I would soon butcher for the night. My skills consisted of cutting anything and everything with joy, passion, even courage as I took down live fish or chickens. The farm-to-plate restaurant was a perfect place for me, but something was missing in my life. Yeah, I got paid at least $500. I paused. What did you have to do? My eyes trailed from the meat in hand to the other preps only a few arms lengths away from me. I could feel cold blood dripping down my gloves' fingers, dropping onto my boots as they spoke. I just had to drive these people to an old house and leave. They handed me an envelope of cash before I left. I watched as he pulled out a crumpled-up piece of snow-white paper from the pocket of his jacket, eyes darting to the other prep before falling back to the man with the envelope. The two were cleaning their station as it was almost time for dinner shift to arrive. How'd you do it? One asked. Just went on this website. The man pulled out another slip of paper, placing it down gracefully to the cutting board below. It almost seemed to glow like a heavenly entity in the lights above, a shining beacon of hope and joy. The rest of their conversation was drowned out as I dissociated for a few rapid heartbeats. I sat in a trace, staring for what felt like an hour but could have only been a few minutes. Charlie. The world started to turn again, as if everything was paused and someone suddenly hit the play button. Charlie. The angry voice cut me from my thoughts as my head swiveled towards the angry man before me. My boss's body covered the door behind him, his head almost hitting the door frame. Tell me what? I said, are you going to cut that meat or let it soak the floor? Dark brown eyes staring darkly into my blue ones before I snapped my attention to the bloody pool that stained my once new boots. I dash. Get it cut and get out of here, he shouted, turning towards one of the prep cooks who had just been chatting. One of you's clean this shit up? I ain't paying you to slack off. You have 5 minutes till it's time to pack up and scram. Neither of the two men questioned him. I watched as they darted towards the supplies closet together. I waited till their shoes vanished from sight before scrambling to the table they'd been working at. Dropping my bloody meat in their cutting board with a sly grin, I chopped it up rapidly, waiting for my boss to leave. With a huff, I felt the man's presence diminish before my chopping slowed, I glanced at the envelope that was left on the table before me. Nudging the envelope with a finger, no money. Frowning, I turned to the paper. It was crisp, a soft yellow color. It looked old but felt new. My fingers danced against the top of it to smooth out the crinkled lines. Want cash? Cars? Boats or whores? Just follow the instructions, and anything you desire can be yours. The shouting of my boss, followed by the noise of scrambling feet, caught my attention. Quickly, I grabbed the paper, stuffing it into my pocket before pushing the bloody cuts of steak into its appropriate Tupperware. Moving quickly, I darted back to my station, brushed down my tabletop, dropping my dirty dishes in the sink, and whipping off the last bits of tomato from my cutting board. With that, I made my way to the clock-out table, grinning back at the two men who stared angrily at the blood mess I left on their tables and floor, before heading towards the parking lot. Upon returning to my apartment, I settled into the false light of my lamp, pushing the dirt, papers, and tissues from my desk. Everything collided to the floor with a sharp clatter, my hands sweating as I drove them into the depths of my jacket. The paper was a bit more crumpled than before, as I attempted to flee my place of work before being forced to return my treasure to the hands of those who wouldn't use it in the correct manner. Anything I wanted? For doing something as stupid as being a bootleg taxi service? This would be a piece of cake, honestly. I sneezed a few times, glaring at the dog for covering my stuff. I was allergic to fur, yet my roommate continued to allow her beast of a dog to trample into my room, chew my stuff, slobber on everything before I returned from work. The soft hiss of rain pounded lightly against the glass window of my room as I glanced over the front of the page yet again. The title image was enticing. I could almost feel myself salivating at the thought of all that could become true. Did I really believe that I could have anything? Of course not. Did I really believe that idiot at work got all that money? Of course not. But the idea he might have was too much for me to pass. I glanced around my crummy room, the paint peeling, the ceiling falling apart, a view of the parking lot where crack whores hung out. This place was a dumpster can in the middle of Garbage Island, and I needed out. I dreamed of owning my own restaurant, having a big home, a fancy car, a girlfriend, or boyfriend. I'm not picky. To get stared, please download one of the web browsers below. I blinked a few times. I remember these. I used to download these things to go on the deep web as a teenager. Of course, as a teenager, I got spooked by the smallest things and never dropped farther than a few feet of the murky waters in the shark-infested internet. Pulling my small laptop to a sitting position, I got started. My memory serves me well, as it only took me an hour to download and access exactly where I needed to go. Picking up the paper, it had a very specific set of click here to go here, type this here to do this, watch this to be added to this. It was a bit longer and confusing at times, but I pride myself on how smart I was, how skilled with the internet I was. Finally, I came to a page. It took a few heartbeats to load. The front looked almost like Craigslist, but instead of the usual buy sell/trade mentality, it had different lists. Money, women, specific expenses, special requests, a few more as well. Under these was prices, hours, names of top brands like Apple, Disney, Sony, whatever else you could possibly want. I went to click on the money slot only to have a chat box jump up. Hello, I hesitated. The name was just Admin1. Hello? Before we get started, I'm going to need some information. He sent me what looked like a job application. It asked for social, date of birth, what my current and old jobs were, skills, driver's license, as well as some other personal information. Was this a scam? I clicked out of the chat windows, clicking on the lower paying amount, which was 100. It took a few seconds to load, and what jumped up looked just like Craigslist yet again. Ads were covering the page. I need a ride to this location. I need someone to drink this. Who wants to suck a dick? And more followed. All these things were easy. I'd drink someone's piss for 100, why not? Clicking out, I explored the other numbers up to 1,000. Some were a little sketchy, from doing nasty pranks, stealing, robbing, raping, and even kidnapping. Yet I found myself not caring in the slightest. None seemed that terrible to me at the time. I know, I'm awful, but I need money. I laughed at some of the stupid ones. Help me kill a vampire. Snapchat Mothman. I want to fuck a demon. Those would be easy money, I didn't believe in that nonsense anyways. I figured I'd take on a few easy ones and be set. I pulled the chat window back up. It took me another hour to fill out their forms. After I filled out one, I was sent another and another. After that, I made a nickname for the site before being informed I was going to be reviewed and would be contacted via my cell phone. He had me pick and choose some of the tasks I was interested in, and with that I logged off. Giddy like a child on Christmas, I could hardly sleep that night, devoting most of it to sneezing and laying in bed overjoyed at the idea of leaving this shithole soon. Sleep fell upon me late that night. I settled into an uncomfortable yet excitable snooze. A week passes. I was a little brokenhearted as I heard nothing. I decided to check the website again to see if an admin would be online, but when I tried to reach the site, it wouldn't allow me. Depression started to take over. Panic, I gave them all I had. My bank account information, my social, ID. How would I explain this to the cops? Finally, on my day off, I was sent a text. I scrambled from the warmth of my covers, blood roaring in my ears as I looked over the text from an unknown number. Hello, Charlie. You have been accepted by the admins. You will receive a phone call within the next hour. Good luck. Good luck. It was like clockwork as the phone rang only seconds later. My heart leapt as I put the phone to my ear. A ragged voice purred at the other end. Hello, Scrooge. I grinned at the nickname. I'd like to hire you. I was hired that day to follow someone. I met with a very average-looking man. He handed me a camera, tape recorder, and half of $500. With that, I was off. The man tipped his hat at me. He was older, wearing formal with a cane. He looked like someone's grandfather, but I didn't question this as I got to work. It was a long day. I was informed to spy on a male. He was short, maybe 5'3", long shaggy hair, shaggy beard, wearing lazy-looking pants and a t-shirt. He looked like any other normal guy, but I didn't question this. I followed him, took pictures, voice recordings, the works. He didn't seem to notice me. I felt rush of adrenaline I'd never felt before, and as the time came to a close, I felt the desire for more. I got paid that night, returned home, and waited. I had 3 days off. I could do anything. I sat in my chair, logged on, was overjoyed to find the page was up yet again. I didn't think twice about it as I started to pick out jobs. The next 3 days went by in a blur. I did job after job after job. I'd pick a job. Either they'd approve me or reject me before giving me a different job to do. I stayed in the 500 and below range. I stole some stuff, broke into a few homes, made some rather unsavory phone calls. I had already made my paycheck 2 times over by the end of the 3 days. Upon returning to work, I felt like I was on top of the world. No man was like me. I had so many skills. I could do anything. I learned so much just by doing petty crime. It was such a thrill, I almost couldn't hold back my frustration with work. As I started to clean up for the end of the day, my boss stormed up to me, his bulky frame looming over me, his eyes wide with anger. He opened his jaw to speak, but before his words could tumble out, I spoke out. I'm putting in my 2 weeks, I sneered. The anger on his face melted, brows narrowed in confusion as I puffed out my chest to speak. I found a better job that pays me what I deserve. I informed the male before me. So Ricky I continued. I'm heading home. I'll see you tomorrow. Maybe I tossed down my dish towel, stuck my nose in the air before stomping out. What a rush. I hadn't felt that big since I punched Randy Gorman in high school. I entered my home as if I was the king of the world. My smile wide, my chin up. Maybe I wouldn't go into work tomorrow. What would they do? Fire me? I didn't need them anyways. With the way I was making money, I would be living the big time soon. I decided work was shit. I didn't need to work for those assholes anymore. Ricky would live without my help. He gave the chef promotion to someone else anyways. I went full-time doing my Craigslist jobs. I still stayed in the lighter range of things, but the more I did, the more I felt the tug to do more, harder things, evil things. One night I decided to do it. I took on $1,000 prize, something I'd been hesitant about. I had to kidnap a baby. What for, you ask? Who cares? They could have used this small child as a paperweight, and I wouldn't care one way or another. I did what I always did, met a lady in a coffee shop. She tried to tell me some stupid bullshit about it being her rightful baby or something. Who cares really? Boring details. She handed me half of what I was supposed to get. She got up and left. I sipped my coffee, glancing in the bag she handed me. A Walmart bag with a single envelope nestled in the bottom. My smile faded when a noise caught my attention. Someone grabbed the chair across from me, yanking it out, causing the metal frame to make a loud, angry scream. Slowly, I raised my head. My heart stopped. Standing before me was a large, muscle-bound man with a wicked smile formed over his usually frowning face. Ricky. His hair had recently been cut down. His normally dark eyes seemed to have a new light to them as he took a seat. I swore I heard the chair heave in agony under the weight of his large, muscle-built frame. So, Scrooge, my heart stopped. You're the one who's been piling on the work loud recently, huh? My mouth was dry. Nothing seemed to want to come out as I opened my jaw to speak, yet silence continued to fill the air. What was I supposed to say? How did he know? Why, yes, I squeaked out. Did I really fuck myself over this bad? Was he sent to kill me? I shook silently as I took a quick swig of my warm drink, looking around to prevent myself from looking him in the eye. That's when my eyes fell upon a familiar face, the man I stalked. He was sitting in a chair not too far away. His eyes in a book narrowed. I have a personal job for you. My eyes snapped back to the man before me. His grin was thin, wide. He almost reminded me like a snake. I almost expected a thin tongue to come out and lick the air around me. A job? I replied dumbly. Of course. I was the best after all. Wait, did that mean? Yes, a job. You'll be getting 20,000 big ones. The world stopped. Did I hear him right? My eyes grew to the size of moons. My jaw almost hit the floor. He looked around us as if making sure no one was within earshot. I glanced around as well, paranoid now, only to notice the man from before was gone. Blinking a few times where he sat, I returned my sharp gaze back to Ricky. What's the job? I managed to spit out, taking another drink of my latte. I see the way you use that knife of yours, Charlie, he whispered, getting close enough to my face that his lips nearly touched my nose. I felt shivers racing through my body as dread ran up and down my spine like someone ran ice claws across my back. Would I be key? I couldn't say it. Was someone's life worth all that money? Yes and no. We just need you to make a very specific cut. He replied smoothly. Sitting back, the male pulled a folder from his bag, pushing the manila paper towards me. As if my hands were made of lead, I slowly reached for it. Ricky moved like lightning. He grabbed my hand, yanking me towards him so my face was only inches from his. If you accept this offer and mess up in any way, he whispered, your face is going to be in my next folder. I yanked my hand away in terror, glancing down at the yellow folders sitting in the table before me. Eyes wide with curiosity. I was the best, right? I could cut someone for that much money. Yet the way Ricky was talking, I didn't hesitate anymore as I grabbed the folder quickly, opening it with excitement popping through my veins. The first thing I saw was a picture of the man I stalked. It was the same picture I took. His amber eyes narrowed, his long hair running down his back. Something about the way his eyes looked. It was almost as if he was looking at the cam. Well, hang on. Who do you think I am? I went to cooking college, not Oxford. I need time to read. Skipping over the picture, I read what was written. For user, Scrooge name, Gunner. Gunner is to be kidnapped, taken to the location on the map. He is to have his tattoo on his calf cut off. Not full leg, just tattoo. With knife provided as asked by the payer. You are then to leave, give the tattoo to the payer, and go home. If this is accepted, you will be asked to take a week off. I glanced up at Ricky, who was sitting back in his chair, eyebrow raised. Are you the payer? No, I'm an admin. I had a few questions, but before any of them left my mouth, he pulled the paper from my hands, holding it up as if to taunt me with it. If you do this, you will be working with me and 2 others. You will be given all the money at the end. This is a big job. This man will not come out alive, but you will not be part of the main killing. He pulled a picture from his pocket, holding it up for me to see. I narrowed my eyes at the picture. The picture was of Gunner's tattoo. It was the skull of an animal with what seemed to be antlers. Probably a male deer. Judging from the name, I assumed him to be a type of hunter. So he was going to die. But I wasn't the one who was doing it. I remember the joy I felt for cutting open meat, the beautiful red. I glanced down at my shoes that still had red stained on them before looking back up at Ricky. I'll do it. The man smiled, handed me the papers. We're going to pick you up tomorrow at 5 a.m. With that, he turned and left. The night went as planned. I broke into the home, super easy, and took the small baby right from its bed. I took the screaming infant to its mother? Who cares? It wasn't as hard as I assumed it to bed as I drove home to get ready for tomorrow. As I got into my room, I noticed a package on the bed. I slowly lifted it up and noticed it had Scrooge the Duck doodled over the front, causing me to give a dry laugh. The inside of the box had a few more scraps of paper, giving the exact place I would go after the crime is done, what to do after, how to wash off blood, and how to take care of the skin. The box also held a piece of Tupperware from the very place I had just quit from not long ago, as well as a knife that was generally made for thin, perfect cuts. It was real. This was happening. I was going to help murder someone. I know I was excited before, but this was far greater than anything else I could possibly explain. It was as if my body was filled with lightning. Sleeping was impossible. I stayed up for hours looking over the picture of Gunner's tattoo, carving it out in whatever I could find to practice. My heart was beating so fast I swore the entire apartment complex could hear it as I continued with my work. The time ticked by slowly. I finally slept. Heavy, happy sleep. I dreamed of stabbing Gunner, his blood rushing out, covering the floor, lapping hungrily at the legs of my pants, spewing out, the room filling with crimson. I could almost taste the blood. It was so sweet. My alarm went off. It was 4 a.m. I got to my feet, got dressed and threw away clothes, got a bag together and waited. A large car pulled up. An all-white van had its windows tinted as well as a license plate for out of state. I was growing more giddy with every second as I scrambled for the door, throwing open the passenger seat and settling it. This was it. I was about to help kill a man. I was going to help kill a man. For a heartbeat, I froze. Was it worth it? Maybe this guy had kids or something. Wait, no, I hate kids. Who cares? I'll kill his kids too. Are you ready? Ricky asked, glancing down at me. The grunts of a few men behind me spooked me. I looked back to see 2 men almost the same size as Ricky. I felt no fear surrounded by these large men. After all, Gunner was small. How much damage could he possibly do? I nodded, sitting back in my seat as the car started forward. We drove for about 15 minutes before pulling up to a small park. It was well lit. The full moon glowed above, casting cold light against the grasses below. A small playground settled in the center of a sea of grass. Beside this was a path with lights hanging down around it to keep it bright. Every morning he comes running. Every night, too, I chimed, reading the man's information on a slip of paper I found in my folder. I remember taking his night run pictures. More like dusk than night. I was excited. You could hear it in my voice, see it in my eyes. The men all got out of the car, leaving me to my studies. In a sick manner, I wanted to know everything about this guy I could. Sadly, much wasn't on here. Job unknown. Family unknown. Friends none. So on and so forth. It was as if this guy wasn't even real. There were pictures I took of him chatting with a few people. He gave away soup at a kitchen, was seen paying for someone's groceries, talking to other people. Snorting at the good two shoes bullshit, I turned a page to see a small section. Girlfriend. Sawyer. Black dark hair, blue eyes. I just had a small picture of them together next to the writing. She was pretty. Maybe that's who wanted him killed. The bastard probably cheated. I scoffed. Time went by. The moon was slowly starting to die behind the trees. The stars danced. Where were they? It had been a good 20 minutes. The sun would be up soon, and so would other people. I glanced around looking for any homes, but the park was rather secluded. It was then that I felt something smack against the car. Scrambling to the window, I looked outside. Ricky was making his way to the door. I moved myself back into my seat as the driver's side swing opened. The large man settled back in his spot, tossing a gun into my lap. Glove box, he snarled. Only seconds ticked by when the back door was opened. One man climbed in. The gunner was shoved next to him before the last man sat down. I sneezed a few times, causing Ricky to grunt in irritation. Saw the gun. Tail went right between his legs. Coward. Ricky laughed. I glanced back at Gunner. His face was covered, hands tied, feet tied. He didn't move as we started the car. It jumped to life and stared to cruise forward. I raced my fingers through my shaggy blonde hair as we started our journey. The minutes ticked by. The sun cast dapple light against the clouds, but it was swallowed whole by the threat of a storm. Rain ticked against the window an hour and a half later till finally we pulled into a forest. The trees were dense, large, a 2-hour drive, and finally we were getting close. The entire drive I had completely forgotten my hate for Ricky, laughing, joking, and even smoking with the three. You can have whatever drugs you'd like after you make your cut. Ricky mused, my treat. Excitement was bubbling up in my chest as a small home showed before me. It seemed like something you'd see out of a horror movie. One should be worried a bad gust of wind might just knock it down. Holes littered the roof, and in the driveway was a small Chevy Cavalier. That's your getaway car, one of the men informed me from the back as they opened the doors, roughly tugging Gunnar out of the car. He let out a grunt, falling to his knees before being hoisted up. I stepped out as well, sneezing a few times as I did so. I glanced at Gunnar as they dragged him towards the front door of the house. I had almost forgot he was in the car. He had been completely silent, not a word, didn't try to move or escape. Something about the man made me shiver. He acted as if this was just something to be expected. The house loomed over us, its old windows angry. It smelled of dust and mold, letting out a loud groan as the door was pushed open and Gunnar pushed inside. The inside was covered in dust. The floors were carpet covered in dust. The insides were empty, gutted out years ago by whomever owned this home. Now all that was left was an old couch dead in the middle of the place, as well as a small little table with a few knickknacks set on too. Gunnar was pushed into the couch, and when his body hit the pillows of the cushions, dust exploded everywhere. I sneezed a few times as the dust covers the room. Allergies? One of the men laughed, opening the door to a basement. Only to fur, not dust. I mused, must be a cat around here. We need to set up and get ready. You stay here and watch him, Ricky stated as the three made their way down the set of stairs. Each step screaming under the weight of the men. They're so big the wood's probably going to break. Am I right? I nudged Gunnar's arm with my fist. Don't look so glum. I sat across from him, sniffling as another sneeze took over. You get to go to heaven. I'm sure you're religious. I saw you giving stupid people money. Gunnar's eyes glanced up at me. Anger was fuming in their depths, as if they were made of fire. You mean the homeless people? He growled. Yeah, whatever those fuckers. You know they sit in front of my apartment and eat up all the space. He didn't reply to me. The anger in his eyes just seemed to grow. I felt awkward as I tried to think of something to say. What was I supposed to say to someone I was about to help kill? Nice weather recently. I fumbled. It'll be real nice tomorrow. Too bad you won't be seeing it. No answer. So Blue Eyes, she your girlfriend? I opened my folder, pulling out a picture of the girl. She's hot. Maybe I'll make her mine after this. I heard the venom in my own voice. If not, I might not give her a chance. It felt wonderful to talk like this, to have so much power. He couldn't say a thing to stop me either, but his reaction wasn't what I expected. He laughed. His laugh seemed to echo against the broken walls of the home. She's scarier than me, he whispered. I bit my lip. What did that mean? I got up, deciding to explore to pass the time. I checked my phone, no signal. I checked around the empty room, but all I found were the car keys for my getaway vehicle. I pocketed them. Turning back to Gunnar, who was staring out the window, the rain lightly patting onto the ground below. A few drops of water fell from the broken ceiling. Before I could say anything, Ricky walked up the steps. We are ready. With that, the men came back. They started to herd Gunnar down the steps, shoving him harshly with each step. He let out a small hiss of pain as I bound down after the group with a jump in my step. As my feet hit the floor, dust kicked up around us. I watched one of the men ruffle Gunnar's long hair as he was forced down into a chair in the dead center of the room. I sneezed a few times as my eyes adjusted to the darkness that collected around us. The only light was from a dim bulb on the ceiling. The sound of shuffling could be heard before a sharp, bright light flickered on. I glanced down to the floor as the brightness burned into the depths of my eyes. My boots were covered in dust. The blood still settled on the top of my boot from what felt like ages ago. That's when I froze. I could see shoe prints in the dust from all of us. I followed the prints from the stairs to Gunnar's chair. One of the prints wasn't human. It looked like the prints of an animal. I immediately noticed one of the male shoes had fallen off in his scuffle a few hours back. But why would there be a, "Hello everyone"? Snapping my neck towards the voice, I looked on in shock. In front of Gunnar was a large spotlight that shone light directly on him, a few monitors, and a video camera. Ricky was wearing a pig mask, laughing as he introduced himself to the world. This was it. It was one of those live stream murders. I heard of these things happening in the deep web, but I never thought I'd be a part of one. I forgot about the paw print as excitement rang through me like a bell. Ricky tugged a small table from the darkness. On the table were tools of all sort. I could see messages popping up on the screen. Put an ice pick in his knee. One typed, drill through his rib cage. Another wrote, scalp him. One roared, now we will get to all that. Ricky laughed. First we have a special guest. I felt a nudge. I turned towards one of the men who was holding a duck mask out to me. I felt my heart flutter. I gladly took the plastic mask. I placed it over my face before digging through my bag. I pulled out Gunnar's file and the knife, letting out a gasp of surprise as the file slipped. A few pictures fell out of the chocolate-haired male going about his life. My heart tugged. For a second I frozen, dissociating as I tried to figure out if I really wanted this. But the money... I looked to Ricky, whose hand was out to present me. I felt another nudge as I gripped the knife and made towards the camera. Scrooge, everyone. Ricky laughed. He's going to be cutting off a very special tattoo before we get stared. Ricky made towards Gunnar, who was looking dead in the camera, the same fire in his eyes as before. The large man took a pair of scissors off the table, cutting open the other's jeans to show off the large tattoo on his calf. The world started to go quiet in my ear as I made towards the other's leg. Completely focused, I didn't even hear anything Ricky was saying or doing. It was as if the world was underwater. I slowly placed the tip of the knife against the skin. I shook everything in slow motion. I looked up at Gunnar, who glanced down at me. His eyes flashed. Was it fear? No. It was something I could identify. You'll regret this, he whispered. I can smell you from miles away. Next time, don't spill any blood. I stared at him. What did that mean? What felt like hours was only a few heartbeats before I heard Ricky shout my username. I plunged the knife down. The sick noise that followed sent a shiver up my body. The groan of agony from the man in the chair caused me to break whatever spell was held on me. I slowly started to move the knife around the tattoo. The skin let out soft pops as the knife moved against its soft surface. Crimson dripped from the large cut in his leg to the ground below, splashing into my boots in the same manner as the meat from work. A giddy laugh broke from my lips, sharp metal gliding through the flesh like butter. The blood was covering his leg. My hands, I couldn't believe it as I closed the circle around his tattoo. He let out a few deep groans. As I started to cut the layer off, I froze. Under the bloody skin was something else. I pulled the knife back, running the tip over the dark hair. I sneezed. Why'd you stop? A voice asked. I looked back up at Ricky, dumbfounded, before starting my cutting again, but this time no noise came from Gunnar as the large flap of skin fell to the ground. I glanced at the opening in the skin, only to scream. I jumped back in confusion and horror. Ricky scrambled back to prevent me from bowling into him. I told you, Gunnar growled. He had been glancing down at me while I worked, and now he looked up slowly to me and the other man. His once amber eyes were now a bright yellow. His face was starting to twist. His teeth clattered to the floor as the skin on his body budged and moved as if they were a ripple in a calm lake. His long hair started to move, swaying, covering his back. The skin split open, blood racing down his body as the skin crackled to show off the fur under him. Panic exploded through my body, fear burning through my head, blood roaring in my ears as a small voice screamed at me to run. What are you? I hear someone yell. He's still tied down. Ricky shouted, kill him. All three men rushed Gunnar, who let out an inhuman, earth-shattering howl. Everyone froze in fear. It took a few seconds for me to regain my control as I got to my feet. The men seemed to return to reality as they grabbed knives, scissors, anything to kill Gunnar. Fuck this, I hissed, glancing at the screen of words. Everyone seemed to stop typing at once as the large men struggled to shove anything into the hard flesh of the wolf. He's getting loose. Ricky shouted, Charlie, help us. I looked from the mess of bodies cuffing Gunnar to the door before looking down at the large chunk of tattooed skin. My jaw fell. Charlie, Ricky shouted again. With that, the cords holding the werewolf let out a sick snap. I raced forward and snagged up the skin, blood still dripping from it, but the tattoo was clean. A deer skull. In the middle was 3 large slashes. Just as I grabbed the large chunk of flesh, Gunnar sunk his teeth into one of the men's necks. I watched in horror as the thorn-sharp teeth broke through the skin so easily. It was as if the man's neck was made of nothing but jello. Gunnar tore a large chunk of flesh from its host. Blood exploded from the opened wound, splashing against the walls. I didn't waste any more time. I grabbed my backpack and started for the stairs. The sickening crunch of bones could be heard as my feet met the first step. Charlie. The anger in Ricky's voice was nothing compared to the fear that pumped through my veins like blood. I ran halfway to the top of the steps when a loud scream pierced my heart. My feet stumbled for a few steps, but I refused to look back until my hand collided with the cold metal of the doorknob. Sucking in air, I slowly turned to look at the mess below. Blood stained the floor, covered the walls. One of the men's heads had been crushed into the floor. His brain was smashed into the tarps that covered the area. The other's head was stuck in the wall, as if Gunnar had tossed it into the now broken computer monitors. Finally, I glanced to the first step where Ricky was trying to pull himself towards me. "Charlie, please," he begged, holding out his hand. Gunnar, who had been breaking the rest of the computer equipment, slowly started to walk towards Ricky, whose legs were bent in odd ways, being dragged behind him. "Please," he begged. Gunnar dug his claws into the man's legs, yanking him down from the few steps he climbed. "Charlie," he shouted, tears racing down his cheeks. I shot him a smile, waved, and opened the door. Should have promoted me. The look on Ricky's face is forever burned in my skull, the look of betrayal. I slammed the door behind me. Now I had to run. Now way that damn werewolf was going to catch me. I tucked the scrap of skin into my bag, ripped off the mask, and pelted through the house at top speed. Not only was my old boss dead, but I was about to make a lot of money. I couldn't believe my luck as I tore open the front door of the home, slamming it behind me with force. The car keys jingled in my pocket as I fished for them. It only took a few heartbeats for me to find them. A howl ripped the piece of the outside apart. Rain slowly started to fall again as I scrambled to shove the key into the car door, pulling it open with rapidly. "Dumbass!" I laughed. I was on top of the world again as the car roared to life, causing my body to slowly start to relax. It only took a few minutes for me to put the house miles behind me as I drove as fast as I physically could down the streets. No way that Wolf was going to find me. I was safe. I just had to drop off the skin, and I was safe. I glanced in the back mirror, and in the darkness of the dying day, I could just make out a large shape. It was charging towards my car at an alarming speed. Fear flickered back into my bloodstream. I cursed under my breath as the rain slowly fell. I knew the forest was thick, long, dense. Half of me wanted to pull over and start running, but I knew that he'd track me down easily. I felt hot tears burning into the sides of my eyes. I didn't want to die. I was just about to make the money from my own restaurant. Another howl, a deep, angry howl. I knew I was toast, done for, pushing daisies. I was dead. I'll never do this again. I just want my own restaurant. I was desperate. I shouted into the air, eyes wide, palms shaking, sweat racing down my brow. I didn't want to die. I promise I'll never hurt anyone again. That's when it stopped. Not the car, not my tears, but the feeling of dread. It was as if the weight was lifted from my body. I looked in the mirror. Nothing. The rain was the only sound I could hear, and soon I was out of the trees. I'm home free. I drove home. I changed, showered, put the skin in its proper place, and left. Now here I am. I'm sitting in a coffee shop, waiting for the mystery person to give me my money. I have the skin in a bag. I don't know exactly what happened tonight, or even if he was a werewolf. I just know it happened. You don't have to believe me. I don't care either way. Because I'm about to be the proud owner of a new restaurant. The only thing I'm a little worried about while I wait, I can't stop sneezing. It's giving me some bad anxiety, but I'm hoping it's just my clothes. They're covered in dog hair. I've been waiting an hour or so. Only people in here and a barista and a lady. It's not her. The lady who's picking up the skin is said to have blonde hair, blue eyes. This lady has black hair, blue eyes. I'm going to go talk to her and see what she has to say. Maybe she just dyed her hair. She has a bag with her. She actually looks familiar. Oh well, wish me luck, everyone. I'll keep you updated if anything else happens. Second story. My girlfriend took me camping. I just want to start by saying that dating is hard. Once you get past all the bots, ads, and scammers and meet a real person, the guessing game begins. Why is this person actually available right now? Are they really just down on their luck? Or is it something else that you're happier not knowing? Then, once you figure out their deep, dark secrets, the question becomes, are they willing to put up with your deep, dark secrets? This process can take weeks to sort out, usually resulting in a dead end somewhere, forcing you to start over. The whole thing is frustrating, demeaning, and humiliating enough that you're physically and emotionally exhausted, making you just want to give up and be a loner. Now I know what you're wondering. What's this got to do with anything? Well, it's kind of simple. A little bit ago, I wrote about how my girlfriend, Wendy, never eats and that I heard some unsettling things at her house the last time I visited. Well, I decided to keep seeing Wendy. Sure, she might have some unusual habits, but she makes me feel good about myself, and I'm happy with her. So what if she never eats or chases off bears while nude in the middle of the night? Compared to returning to the dating scene, that's really not so bad. We even have nicknames for each other now, Country Girl and City Boy. I'll let you guess which is which. Anyway, that's a rather long and roundabout way of saying that, yeah, I went on that camping trip with her, and things didn't go quite how I expected. First off, I want to say that she was right. The forest really is beautiful. The sun's heat, combined with the coolness of the shade, while listening to the insects drone lazily in the background, seems to slow time to a crawl, making each breath a relaxing experience in and of itself. It's entirely unlike anything you'll experience during your morning commute. Combine all that with the right company, and soon you'll wonder why you'd ever return. And let me tell you, Wendy is 100% the right company. Wendy was quick with tips to make the hike easier, from how to properly distribute your pack load to how to lace your shoes for maximum comfort. During the trek to where we were going to set up camp, she alternated between offering interesting bits of information about the local flora and fauna and walking in silence, allowing me to get lost in the experience. The whole affair made me want to give up the city life and move to the country. There was just one thing during the walk that wasn't as pleasant as everything else. At one point, we must have walked too close to a skunk or a rotting carcass or something because the whole area around us started to reek. At first, it wasn't so bad, but eventually it got so strong it made me want to gag. I jokingly mentioned it to Wendy, but she just looked ahead like she was determined and told me, "Pick up the pace. We'll be past it soon enough." Sure enough, we eventually got past the smell, and things quickly became pleasant again. The rest of the hike passed without incident, and Wendy even helped me set up the tent. Her evident experience in the matter showed through because it took no time. Soon enough, everything was ready, and we even had a nice, cheerful fire roaring. This time, when she pulled out the supplies for dinner, I didn't even bat an eye when it was clearly only enough for one. Whatever was going on with her, this was just the way it was going to be. It was up to me to accept that or move on, and I'd made my call. But I have to say, for someone who never seems to eat, she sure knows how to sear a steak to perfection. After a pleasant evening, and an even more pleasant night, we passed out in the tent together while listening to the crickets and the more distant owls. But of course, if that's all that happened, I wouldn't be writing about it here. Sometime during the night, I awoke to find I was alone in the tent. This wasn't too unexpected because Wendy was both an outdoor enthusiast and a bit of a night owl. I debated calling out to her, but something in the air felt like I shouldn't disturb it with such an out-of-place sound. However, Mother Nature did have her demands, and it was time to answer her call. As I unzipped the tent and stepped out, I couldn't help but look up into the night sky. The stars were breathtaking. You never see this many this vibrant in the city. However, their beauty couldn't distract me for long in the face of more urgent demands. Do you know that feeling when you've been holding it in a little too long and finally experience relief? If it weren't for my experiences earlier that night, I might be tempted to claim it as better than sex, but we'll just say it was still pretty euphoric. Maybe it distracted me from the fact that all the usual night sounds had suddenly gone quiet, but it couldn't distract me from the sudden smell of rotting flesh. It was even stronger than it had been on the trail, and was accompanied by the kind of fear that you usually feel when you're very young and just starting to wonder if there might be reasons sounds go bump in the night. I gagged as I struggled to cut off the stream, zip up my pants, and retreat into the tent again. Once in the tent, I reached for the flashlight, then hesitated. I desperately wanted to see better, but something in the back of my mind told me it was better to remain hidden. Of course, I don't know how well hidden a blue tent in the middle of the forest can be, but turning on a flashlight would be like activating a beacon for everything within a few miles to see. I sat in the dark for I don't know how long, feeling my heart pound through my chest loud enough that I was sure whatever was out there could hear it clearly. Thankfully, the smell eventually faded, but I was still so high on adrenaline that I knew I wouldn't sleep another wink for the rest of the night. Or so I thought. The following day, I awoke with Wendy cuddled in my arm, with one of her legs and arms draped over me, and once again, she was totally nude. Now, I was pretty sure she'd put on some pajamas before going to bed, but as she stirred and I got a good look at what was on display, I suddenly didn't care all that much. Eventually, she smiled lazily up at me and spoke. "You sleep all right, city boy? You seem to have some pretty rough dreams in the middle of the night." At the time, those words made perfect sense. In the light of day, it seemed pretty clear that whatever happened last night was probably just a vivid dream brought on by the experiences of the day before in an unfamiliar environment. After a bit more time together, we decided to get up and tackle another day in the forest. However, when I finally crawled out of the tent, I could see our entire camp was in disarray. It was like something had gone through and tossed everything around. A few of the more delicate items were totally demolished. After a moment, I called out, "Hey, you might want to take a look at this." As Wendy crawled out of the tent, she made a face. Must have been a bear. They usually don't come out this way, so I wasn't too worried about them. I guess that's on me, sorry. A bear, that kind of made sense. At least, I told myself so. As we were cleaning up, I even saw tracks, though, in my inexperience as a city boy, I would have said they belonged to a dog, not a bear. A huge dog. Maybe a wolf? What was even odder was when I found what looked like hoof prints. Looking at the prints, I realized that deer must be much bigger than they look on TV, since they were more than twice as long as my hand. There isn't much more to say about the day. We fixed the place up, had breakfast, went on a hike, made dinner, and called it a night with a few other minor activities sprinkled throughout. I was back to enjoying the trip, so much so that I had mostly forgotten about the night before. But that night is when things took a bit of an unexpected turn. Once again, I awoke in the middle of the night. Thankfully, I wasn't alone this time, as Wendy was still asleep, half on top of me again. However, that stench was back and stronger than ever. It was amazing how bright it seemed in the tent. It must have been a full moon, or at least nearly full, because I could clearly see the shadow of a large deer pass between us and the night sky. But there was something wrong with this deer. It was clearly too tall, as if it was standing on hind legs, and when it opened its mouth, I could even make out a mouthful of very sharp teeth. I couldn't help it. I felt myself breathing more heavily by the second as my heart rate skyrocketed. My mind went blank when I suddenly felt Wendy stir. Remembering the presence of my considerably smaller girlfriend, I suddenly felt protective, as if I couldn't let anything happen to her. I was just about to tell her to be quiet when I noticed her looking up at me with a finger on her lips as if telling me to do the same. Then she whispered to me, "Stay in the tent," and started to get up. I don't know what I was thinking, or if I was thinking. All I knew was I couldn't let Wendy go out to face whatever that was, so I reached out and grabbed her wrist before she could exit the tent. However, when she looked back at me, I released her immediately, almost as scared of her as whatever was outside the tent. Her eyes reflected light back at me like a cat's, and I could see the nails on her hand growing as I watched. In half a moment, she turned back around, opened the tent, and climbed outside. I will never forget the sound I heard at that moment. After I got home, I looked up the calls of a bunch of wild animals, and in hindsight, I'd say it was like a compilation of an elk call, a rabbit scream, and a mountain lion scream, but impossibly loud. Wendy shouted in answer, her tiny human voice sounding so frail in comparison. At least it did until it started to change, morphing and twisting into the howl of an impossibly large wolf. I couldn't help it. I peeked out the tent flap, and standing in front of the tent was what I could only describe as a werewolf. The little 5 foot and change Wendy was now standing at least 7 feet tall, covered in fur with claws and fangs that looked like they could tear through steel, and she looked ready for murder. Then, some movement on the opposite end of our camp drew my attention, and I witnessed a living nightmare that suddenly made a werewolf seem like less of a problem. It looked kind of like a deer if a deer had more articulated limbs far too long for its body. The feet ended in hooves, but the hands ended in long, bony claws. The whole thing looked desiccated, its skin drawn so tight over its ribs and arms you could make out the skeleton beneath. The fur was spotty and looked partially rotted, with open holes leaking bodily fluids that should never see light. Its teeth were long and serrated, clearly meant for tearing rather than chewing. I sometimes hear hunters talking about deer being 8 or 10 points, but if I had to estimate, this thing had a 30-point antler, with many of the tines covered in what I suspected to be dried viscera from previous victims. The two monsters charged each other. The nightmare, which I now know was a wendigo, lowered its head, intending to impale its opponent. But at the last second, Wendy threw herself nearly flat on the ground, only to rocket up into the wendigo, latching onto its long neck with her powerful jaws while her hind feet kicked gouges into its vulnerable stomach. However, the wendigo didn't seem willing to give up that easily and tossed Wendy aside. She hit the ground hard and was soon set upon by the other monster. She raised an arm to defend herself, only for the wendigo to latch on with its own teeth, easily tearing through her skin and muscles. With a powerful kick, Wendy pushed the nightmare back, then started swiping at him over and over, making it loose ground. However, lowering its head, the wendigo charged forward again, and this time, Wendy wasn't fast enough as the wendigo caught her on his antlers and flipped her over his back, with new blood darkening the tips of the tines. But that was its downfall as Wendy sprung up and again latched onto its neck with her teeth, this time from behind. The nightmare struggled in vain, occasionally raking Wendy with his claws, but she refused to let go and began ripping and tearing her way through its neck until she grabbed hold of its antlers, and with one final jerk, the head came free. I don't have the heart to describe what came next, but let's just say the sound of flesh being torn and eaten is much more distinct through the thin membrane of a tent than a closed cabin window. Time passed. At least an hour, maybe 2 or 3. It's hard to say for sure. I don't know what I expected to happen next. Maybe I was going to be next, or perhaps I'd wake up from this nightmare. But eventually, the adrenaline passed, my eyes grew heavy, and I fell asleep again. When I awoke in the morning, I was alone this time. There was no sign Wendy had come back. I'd half hoped she'd still be here, telling me I'd had another nightmare, but I don't think I would have believed it again. It was kind of sad and lonely packing up our things by myself. I debated bringing Wendy's stuff with me, but I'm not that good of a hiker and wasn't confident I could pull it off, so I just left her things in her pack inside the tent. When I exited the tent, I was more than a little surprised to see Wendy sitting calmly by the fire pit with no wounds in sight. She smiled sadly. So, I guess I owe you an explanation. I remember hesitating, my mind blank, before I settled on the thought I had earlier. What? You're not going to try and convince me it was a nightmare again? She looked around at all the destruction in the campsite. Earth was kicked up, trees had claw marks gouged out, and there were signs of blood splatter everywhere. I didn't think I could convince you this time. I nodded as I looked around. Yeah, I guess not. Then, I looked back at her. For a bit there, I was starting to think you were the monster eating people out here. Wendy pointed at herself, then laughed. Wait, me? Wendy the Wendigo? Don't you think that's a little too on the nose? I couldn't help it. As weird and messed up as everything was, as disturbing as everything I learned was, this was the Wendy I knew and cared for. So, I laughed with her. Yeah, maybe so. Long story short, we're still together. Sure, my girlfriend might be a 7-foot-tall monster that eats other monsters for fun, but everyone has their quirks. Besides, dating is hard, and I'm happy where I am. Third story. The Georgia Werewolf. One of the more curious paranormal incidents in Georgia is the Georgia werewolf Emily Isabella Burt. Apparently, Ms. Burt was a resident of Talbot County, a rural county in southwest Georgia between Macon and Columbus. The Burt family, a wealthy and prominent family in the Talbot County community, had several children. Of all of her children, It appears that Emily Isabella was the one with the most problems. For one, she had inherited a lot of physical traits from her father, including dark hair and bushy eyebrows. However, she was said to have had sharp, white canine teeth that made her smile quite disturbing. In one report, Roberts claims that Emily Isabella's mother took her to a local dentist to see if the teeth could be altered in any way. He could do nothing for her. Soon afterwards, she fell ill and suffered from restless nights. Emily is said to have strangely wandered the county during her restless nights. Legend has it that the beau of one of Emily Isabella's sisters, a William Gorman, reported to the Burts that something was killing his sheep. Fearful that this may soon be happening to her animals, Mrs. Mildred Burt became quite concerned. On ensuing visits, Gorman would recount stories about more sheep killings and that some of his cattle were killed as well. He was concerned about the killings and decided to take action. He reported that he was going to be putting together what amounted to a posse. Their intentions were to shoot and kill whatever beast was doing the damage. Emily Isabella was unusually interested in what was going on and what events had transgressed in the hunt for this animal. On the night of the big hunt, Mildred Burt, who also had inherited more than a few guns and was a great markswoman, went out with her pistol. She apparently suspected that Emily Isabella was somehow involved with the killings, and she wanted to be prepared for anything. As she was near the area, an animal lunged for her, and she fired. It ran away. Interestingly enough, the next morning, it was reported that Emily Isabella had a bullet hole in her left hand. After being taken to a local physician, her mother decided to send her to Paris to be treated by a doctor who specialized in lycanthropy, a disorder that made its victims think they were werewolves. While she was in Paris, the attacks stopped, and once she returned, supposedly cured, the attacks fell to a minimum. Emily died in 1911 and is buried in a small cemetery out in the wilderness of Georgia. To this day, a number of paranormal incidents are reported in the area, with the grave itself generally believed to be haunted by the ghost of the werewolf. People report a strange stillness or sense of unease around the cemetery, and the grave itself is strangely well kept even though the cemetery itself is overgrown and forgotten. Others have reported that when small tokens, chips of stone, etc., are taken from the cemetery, bad things happen to those people not long afterward. There are even some people who note that even just talking poorly of Emily or her family cause the same problems to happen, as if the werewolf does not want others to speak ill of her. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comment section and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.